Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I the bit about the being the authority by default is because 40 years ago when I started looking at the petroglyphs at Safe Harbor and getting into rock art, it was a field that was not a lot of people were interested in. So the idea was kind of that if we don't know what these things mean, we never will. There's no point in studying them. So things have changed a little bit in the past 40 some years, and it's finally getting the respect it deserves, I think. If you'd like me, I can just go right into the presentation. I did add a little bit of extra material tonight that's a little more about the archaeology of this stuff. But we'll just start here. This is a general view of the Safe Harbor area of the Susquehanna River. So I'm going to get into um, and let's see, I'm not advancing. There we go. Okay. So a little bit about Susquehanna River. And let me cut my sound down on my end. Okay. A little bit about Susquehanna River. It starts in Cooperstown, New York, runs about 444 miles down to the head of the Chesapeake Bay. In fact, the Chesapeake Bay is the Susquehanna. It's just been flooded since the end of the last ice age here. Drains about 27,000 square miles. That's half of Pennsylvania, part of New York, and part of Maryland. Longest non-navigable river in the United States. And it's also one of the oldest rivers in the world. We're up to about 325 million years old now, age-wise. There's some push. Some folks think it's might be 50 or 75 million years older than that, but it's been around for a long time. Like it was 100 million years old when the dinosaurs were roaming around in the Northeast. One of the most interesting things about rock art in the Northeast, it is fairly rare to find rock art sites. But this part of the Susquehanna River seems like a very special place, or it was a special place to the native people who lived here for 15,000 years or so and utilized the river. All of the major rock art sites in the entire Susquehanna River watershed are located on this 30-mile long stretch that begins about halfway through Lancaster County and ends just a few miles, well, about down to the Octorara Creek in Maryland. A fascinating aspect of this is that among these rock art sites are three completely different styles of carvings, and you can see them here. Walnut Island is a couple miles above Safe Harbor, just a couple miles above Safe Harbor. And of course, Bald Friar is behind Conowingo Dam now, just a couple miles below the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. But how did this happen? Why did who were the people who carved these? When did they carve them? Why are these styles so different? Do they have different functions done in different times? Good subject for future study. So I'm going to work my way down through the major sites here. And the first site I'm just going to briefly talk about is Walnut Island. And these petroglyphs were exposed. They were Walnut Island was, of course, by its name, wooded. Uh, there was a sawmill there. It was in the middle of the Susquehanna. The race for the sawmill washed out and exposed some of these petroglyphs. So they, for the most part, were buried. I think they were first written about in 1911. Charles Hanna in the Wilderness Road talked about them. Um, in the 1930s, Donald Cadzel with what was then the Pennsylvania Historical Commission had a major expedition into this area prior to the building of Safe Harbor Dam. And these are a couple views of their efforts to I'll say save in quotes the petroglyphs for future generations. They actually jackhammered 68 sections of these petroglyphs out of the rock. The transported them. The photo's a little blurry. It's from one of Donald Cadzel's home movies. But you can see the little boat there roaring through the rapids, and it must have been just a terrifying journey to recover these petroglyphs. So one was something like 9 feet long. They weighed hundreds of pounds, and that's not a very substantial boat. And the before the Safe Harbor Dam was built, it was a pretty wicked area of the Susquehanna River. Um, Cadzel reported his findings, did a pretty good job of describing the petroglyphs in a publication called Petroglyphs in Susquehanna River near Safe Harbor, Pennsylvania. So came out in 1934, I think, and that was the last book until my guide. So it's been about 90 years since a new book has come out. That's long past due. It's still available, still good reading. These the petroglyphs themselves, and you'll see kind of recurring story here. Back in 1990, you can see a picture of the petroglyphs that were recovered in a warehouse at Fort Indian Town Gap. Um, they were just kind of uh, left there to collect. Well, I know when they recovered them, they took them to the car wash to wash off the bird droppings. So they weren't really being curated that well. Um, the lower right photograph is one of the petroglyphs that's now on display at Blue Rock Heritage Center in Lancaster County. And there are a couple more on display up at the State Museum in Harrisburg and other museums in Lancaster County. We're going to drop down to the Bald Friar petroglyphs now, which you are probably familiar with. And these petroglyphs were actually, I think, out of the three major sites, these were probably studied the most. And I'm going to go through a little bit of the history of their study. One of their folks who documented them pretty thoroughly and early on was Martin Kurtz. You can see these petroglyphs are chalked in for visibility. We discourage that these days, but it certainly helped make them visible. So he wasn't the first person to document these. The earliest documentation I have come up with are photographs that was done by Charles Stubbs way back in 1871. And these photographs actually went to the Peabody Museum. But this is the typical bald friar image that is seen far and wide. They were written about in 1881, and this book, I don't think it was a bestseller, but it was observations on cup-shaped and other lapidarian sculptures in the Old World and in America by Charles Rowell, 1881. You can see you probably used the 1871 image of Charles Stubbs to get that graphic. It was also recorded in the Percifer Fraser's book, The Geology of Lancaster County. Obviously, it's not in Lancaster County, but they were interesting enough that he felt compelled to put them in his book, 1880s when that book came out. In 1916, Warren Moorhead led the Susquehanna River expedition. The High Foundation sponsored that, and they did a really pretty thorough job of documenting the petroglyphs that were going to be submerged behind Conowingo Dam. And there are a number of other folks who, over the years, have contributed to the body of work about the Bald Friar petroglyphs, including people like George Reynolds, Paul Cresthall, Dennis Curry, Charlie Hall, and most recently Ed Lennox. I just wanted to put in a plug for the book, The Rock Art of Eastern North America. It has a really good chapter on the Bald Friar petroglyphs. And also, I contributed a chapter on the rock art of the Susquehanna River to that book too. You may be aware that the Bald Friar petroglyphs, after being recovered back in the 1920s, when Conowingo Dam was going to be built, there was an effort to rescue some of these petroglyphs, and this was 30 years before, 20 years before, I'm sorry, about 10 years before the work at Walnut Island. So instead of using compressed air, and jackhammering out, which was a major production even in the 30s, these were actually dynamited out of from the bedrock. I have a newspaper article from, I think, 1927 that says that they sent away to Italy for a special cement to glue them back together, and they would be on display for all future generations of Maryland school children to see and wonder about. So they were on display in the city of Baltimore for a few years, and then they were moved up to the Baltimore Zoo. And then by about the 1960s and the 1970s, they were, I'll say, lost. People kind of forgot where they were. Back in the mid 1990s, Ed Lennox, a researcher from New Jersey, was interested in trying to locate them. I think we had a little competition. I think it took us over a year until he ran into a retired groundskeeper at Druid Hill Park who said, "Hey, there's a pile of rocks over by our maintenance shed. You might want to look at those." And the upper left view is what we found by the maintenance shed. Charlie Hall and I think Dennis Curry was involved too in clearing the vegetation and getting them to a place where they would be safe and sound. So they're down at Jefferson Patterson facility being curated now. Um, and I don't know how I got in this photograph. You can also see a really nice display at the Susquehanna State Park, the Rock Run Grist Mill, and there's a couple other museums in northern Maryland, that have examples of the bald Friar petroglyphs. So in addition to those three major rock art sites, there are four smaller rock art sites in that same 30-mile stretch of river. One's called Cresswell Rock. That's about 10 miles north of Safe Harbor. Sicily Island is below Holtwood Dam. McCall's Ferry is one that we do not know where it is anymore, but it was originally behind where Holtwood Dam is located. And again, you can see the differences in these carvings. The Sicily Island petroglyphs consist of almost entirely consist of cupules, or these curved depressions. Kind of looks like someone took a golf ball and stuck it into mud. There are just dozens carved into these rocks. We don't know the function of those. There's that's three of the sites. The other site is actually in the Octorara Creek, just a short distance from its mouth at the Susquehanna. And that site also consists mostly of cupules. But you know, quite a concentration of rock art sites, considering the vast area surrounding them that has no rock art sites. So why are they here? Well, Lower Susquehanna is a special landscape. You can see the stretch begins at what is the widest point of the entire Susquehanna River, about 1.3 miles wide at Long Level, Pennsylvania. But then the river constricts. You can see this is a map that uh, was done before the dams were built by Benjamin Latrobe. But you can see how the river constricts. It has high hillsides. The water drops off. As a result, there's the 4 hydroelectric plants on the section of the river. But it's a much different 44 miles than the first 400 miles. Starting from Cooperstown, coming down into Pennsylvania, it drops 2.5, 3 feet per mile. When you get to Lancaster County, the top of Lancaster County, it drops more like 8 feet per mile. So it's a powerful, fast-moving river. Has the power to generate electricity. It has the power to destroy things during floods. It also has the power to inspire people to live and occupy the region the way Native people have for 15,000 years, and just to appreciate the beauty and the force of nature that it is. It's also a section of the Susquehanna River that has these things called the deeps. And if you've never heard of the deeps, these are basically potholes. Generally, Susquehanna has some big potholes, 2, 3 feet in diameter, 6 feet deep, 8 feet deep. Well, imagine coming down through the rapids that were above Safe Harbor, coming by Walnut Island. The water's maybe 6 feet deep. You're in your canoe coming down through the rapids. All of a sudden, the water goes from 6 feet deep to 60 feet deep. And for the next quarter mile, the water's 60 feet deep. You have a 60-foot deep pothole. When you get below Holtwood, where Holtwood Dam is now, which would be down there at below Lake Aldred, you can see the deep there goes the whole way down to below sea level. It's over 120 feet deep. And when you get down to the Conowingo Dam, submerged behind the dam now is one that was called Job's Hole, which some people said was bottomless. So I don't have time to go into the folklore surrounding those, but these were created from just huge flows during the end of the last ice age. Actually, a lot of it had to do with ice being formed and just grinding out the bedrock to these enormous depths. So, a really interesting geologic feature that goes along with this area. Um, so we're going to go into the Safe Harbor Petroglyphs now, which has really been my main focus for the last 40 years or so. And this is a view from Big Indian Rock, looking over through the morning mist at uh, an area of the river that is now a lake that is formed behind Holtwood Dam. So the still calm water that we see in this photo is not the same body of water that the native people saw hundreds of years ago. However, the hillside, the landscape, has remained uh, dramatically unchanged because the river was non-navigable, so we never had commercial river traffic. The steep hillsides were just not conducive to building. And so we have these wonderful wild areas of the Susquehanna River that still exist there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the study of the petroglyphs. The first, well, I'm gonna go down to the lower right here, uh, and Campbell Grant's publication in 1967, Rock Art of the American Indian, and you can see his entry about the Safe Harbor petroglyph says that Pectogonkian Thunderbird and other figures, Safe Harbor, Susquehanna River, Pennsylvania, site now destroyed. And that was uh, the view held by many archaeologists and the general public in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. They were studied heavily in the 1930s. People just gradually forgot about them, and by the 60s and 70s, the only people who were really familiar with this rock art site were hunters and fishermen who would be out on that part of the river. This is Professor Porter's chart that was done in 1865, the earliest documentation of the petroglyphs. They actually draped muslin over the rocks and did kind of a rubbing in the muslin, traced those figures and photographed them for this chart. They were also passed along to a group in Ohio. The Western Reserve is the Ohio region. And you can see this neat early picture, early engraving of Big Indian Rock. The petroglyphs on the rock are very inaccurately located and drawn, but it's interesting to see that early view. It's also interesting to see how these designs were depicted and how they changed from chart to chart as we went through time. There's a view of what Big Indian Rock actually looks like. Now, I will say that the water is about 6 feet higher now than before the dam was built. So the rock really did stick high out of the water. It was over 20 feet from the top of the rock to the surface of the water normal river levels. They were written about by Garrick Mallory. This is the first publication of the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology. He had a preliminary paper in that. And he also had, a few years later, had more extensive um, documentation, but the documentation really just uh, um, through all of these reports um, only amounted to a basic description of the rocks and of the figures, very basic descriptions. Um, I want to go back just a couple years here to a guy by the name of Henry Mercer who visited the petroglyphs in 1883. I can't see up at the top of my screen, or 85, I think that was. Anyhow, if you ever heard of Henry Mercer, he was a gentleman who lived in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, sort of a Renaissance man, did archaeology. He collected old tools. He loved working with reinforced concrete. He built amazing buildings in the Doylestown area. But he visited and he kept a journal, made these sketches, and this quote that he put in his journal is kind of interesting in that he describes this as the famous Indian rock in the Susquehanna. So, even back in those days, it was thought of as a pretty significant place. Now, Henry Mercer also had this company called the Moravian Tile Works. And in 1903, he was commissioned to do the tile floor of the state capitol building in Harrisburg. Uh, he incorporated 13 images of the petroglyphs at Safe Harbor into this mosaic tile floor. So it's a really interesting, unique way of documenting them. Those tiles may last as long as the petroglyphs themselves. But if you ever go up to the state capitol in Harrisburg, a beautiful building, you can visit the petroglyphs up there. He had a guide to his tile floor, and this is one of the descriptions that he gave of one of the petroglyphs, but it just gives you a window into how people thought about these things back in the early 1900s. Um, they were part of the wild worship of these crazy Indians. Um, Part of that may have been the public view at the time. Part of it may have been his kind of sensationalizing the images for his guidebook. We're going to come up now to my time. Um, Going into the early 80s, I was given a copy of Donald Cadzell's archaeological report. That's the trusty copy that I had. I was under the impression that the petroglyphs were destroyed or now underwater, but I'd been interested in just visiting places that Native people saw as sacred places. For example, I traveled a lot in Ohio to see the earthworks out there. Um, the Catzell's book gave a general description of where the petroglyphs were located. So I bought a old 16-foot Grumman aluminum canoe and hauled it down there to the river, started paddling around, went by this big rock in the middle of the river looked down and saw the guy down at the lower right here, the long-bodied, long-tailed um, animal that was just above the water line. And here we are about 40 some years later, and I still get excited every time I go out to visit this place. Um, Back in those days, we only knew of two petroglyphs, two sites at Safe Harbor, Big Indian Rock and Little Indian Rock. And interestingly, um, Henry Mercer did in his journal say that there was a small rock in between Little and Big Indian Rock that had carvings on it. And he also had a sketch of a petroglyph on Circle Rock. But the big expedition in the 1930s did not record anything on those. I was actually led to the other sites by a native elder who visited Little Indian Rock with me and said, I'm not from this area, so I can't interpret them, but I do know that there are more here." I said, "No, I read the books. They didn't find any." And he said, "No, go ahead and look." A few years after he gave me that advice, I did look, and now we know that there are actually six sites that contain about roughly double the number of petroglyphs that were known prior to documenting them. To give you an idea of where we got to between the 1900s and the early 1900s and the mid 1900s, there was a rock art researcher out in Pittsburgh who wondered if the sites at Safe Harbor had ever gotten site numbers. The state archaeologist at that time says, "Well, we never found any artifacts there, so they really don't merit being uh, uh, registered as archaeological sites." And you can see James Swagger's response. And so we have come a long way in the next 50 years. In the early 2000s, I was awarded a grant to document all of the known petroglyphs at Safe Harbor, and we went out there and mapped every petroglyph, photographed every petroglyph, measured them all, um, uh, created charts, and treated each petroglyph as a unique artifact. So just to give you an idea of the kind of information that we obtained, we took the overall heights, widths, their orientation. We um, drew the black and white figures traced from photographs. So we got what I think are really pretty good um, uh, representations of the petroglyphs themselves. Um, and this is kind of the result of our work on Big Indian Rock here. Um, and again, you can see the numbers 69, 70, and 71 there, the photograph of the actual petroglyphs and the chart showing them. So, we took about 3,000 measurements. We found 420 Native American petroglyphs, 110 modern ones. And we ran out of time during that uh, project, and so we still have a good number of petroglyphs on Little Indian Rock to finish mapping. Um, you know, archaeology doesn't happen in a day. So, and Little Indian Rock was the best documented of the petroglyphs. That's why we left that one till last. Um, just a little aside as to this idea that no artifacts have come off the sites. We were fortunate enough to have come across in one of the crevices on Big Indian Rock a soapstone bird effigy. And that is on the left side of the screen there. It's about the size of a silver dollar, and it was probably created out of a fragment of a steatite bowl. It has that curvature and sort of the same thickness. Um, but it was likely an offering that was left there. And we're looking down at the back of the bird. Okay, his head at the top, his wings, and he's kind of preening his feathers on his right wing. We have also done research on the erosion of the petroglyphs over the years. And we were able to do this because in the early 1900s, some of the petroglyphs had plaster cast made of them. The picture up at the upper right is a photograph of one of the cast. They were very detailed. You can see there, you can make out the individual grains in the rock. We were able to take um, detailed measurements of those and then go out to the rock art site and measure them against the actual petroglyph. And unfortunately, this is the only photograph of that particular petroglyph that I have. Back in the 1980s, it was still uh, folks had no problem with chalking in the designs to make them show up better. We no longer do that, but you can kind of see the same granulation in that chalk. And along with our chart of the measurements comparing the cast and the petroglyph itself. And if you can go over to the right side of that chart in between the two pictures, um, it says that the average difference between the molds and the petroglyphs are 0.35 millimeter. And this is the reverse of what you may think. The molds are actually shallower than the petroglyphs, the reverse of what you would see if they were eroding significantly. And that's because when you make the negative of the cast, the plaster will shrink a little bit. And you make a positive for the cast, it shrinks a little bit more. And so bottom line is that in the last 100 years, these petroglyphs have really eroded virtually not eroded at all. We can go back to the 1860s and 70s when those people documenting the petroglyphs said that they might be gone in a few years because you could barely see them uh, in the 1860s and 70s. The reason you could barely see them would be that you were out in the middle of the day when the sun was high. And when the sun's high or when there's a cloudy day, you can be standing right on top of these and not see them. They're best viewed when the sun's at a low angle early in the morning or just before sunset. So this is Big Indian Rock. Some of the carvings on Big Indian Rock. Um, this shows the river before the dam was built. You can see there were just a multitude of rocks in the river. It was a rocky wash. The petroglyph sites themselves were along the main course of the Susquehanna. So it was in the area where the water was the most rapid. it was never an easy place to get to in those days, and it can still be challenging even today. Here's a picture of Big Indian Rock, some of the Thunderbirds and medicine people on the top part of Big Indian Rock. Um, you can get an idea of the different textures, sizes, and characteristics. Each one of the rock art sites at Safe Harbor has its own characteristics. Big Indian Rock is the biggest, highest, smoothest, most obvious rock out there. If there was one rock that I would choose to carve on, that's the one that would be. This is Little Indian Rock, and it's kind of interesting to have that boat with the guys fishing. It reminds me of the one in the Western Reserve publication. Um, so you can see Little Indian Rock is just completely covered with petroglyphs, over 150 petroglyphs, making it probably the best expression of rock art in the Northeast United States. It's a much smaller rock. You can see Big Indian Rock in the background of this one. And I wanted to throw this photo in because it shows the difference in the rock since the dam has been built. So the gentleman in the upper picture is sitting on the edge of the rock where the two Amish and their guide are standing on Little Indian Rock. So you can see the river itself has really changed. There's a whole section of Little Indian Rock that broke off between the time that the petroglyphs were created and when Justin Roddy and David Herlandis were sitting there in the late 1800s. Um, Circle Rock is the first rock that I documented. We call it Circle Rock because of those four concentric circles in the one part of it. It is kind of different than the others in that its surface is really rugged. There aren't a lot of good areas to carve petroglyphs. It's not conducive to carving, but it has a large number of petroglyphs on it. It's second only to Little Indian Rock. Conestoga Rock is closest to Safe Harbor Dam. Again, some of these slides are older. They're very difficult to photograph. Um, this rock only has less than a dozen petroglyphs on it. This rock is called Eagle Rock. One of the interesting carvings in that rock is the serpent that appears to the left of that plumb bob that we were using to denote north. But you can see that that carving is actually done in relief. So the image of the serpent itself is raised. It was carved to either side to result in that raised image. And then there is Turkey Track Rock. Cadzel and others described the bird tracks at Safe Harbor as turkey tracks, but they could just as well be eagle or great blue heron tracks. Again, some of them have a stub at the back of them. Uh, they're slightly different shapes, and I think with some additional study, you might be able to better determine what kind of bird they belong to. So there you can see the rocks compared with each other. The questions: why were those rocks chosen out of the hundreds of exposed rocks in that part of the river? Um, Big Indian Rock is about 30 feet wide, maybe 60 feet long. It could accommodate a large group of people. And I think this may have been used as a ceremonial meeting space. A large number of people, you could get 30 people on that rock, no problem, without anyone having to stand on the carvings, which are seen as sacred images. Even the act of creating these petroglyphs, I think, was seen as a sacred act. Some views of Little Indian Rock, where the petroglyphs are just all over. And again, there are times when you can stand on this rock and you would uh, uh, not be able to make them out at all. But really an amazing grouping of petroglyphs. Okay, what do they mean? And we're going to go real late on on this, but are these just images of animals and of people? Um, they could be identifying clans, maybe. Um, a lot of the images have these dots, these cupules that are carved next to them, and those cupules provide evidence that the designs were actually carved um, to transmit some sort of information. We don't know what those dots mean, but that they are there takes it from being a representational image to an iconographic image, an image that's transmitting information. Now, this human figure in the upper left that has the two cupules beside it may represent the fact that it takes 2 days to walk from Safe Harbor to the mouth of the Susquehanna, 2 days from Safe Harbor Petroglyphs to the head of the Chesapeake Bay. You know, we all know what icons are now, and we're at a, a loss for figuring out what a lot of the petroglyphs mean because we're not part of that culture. To us, we all recognize that a red octagon means stop. It wouldn't be so obvious to a native person from those days. We have things like thunderbirds, and we go to ethnological information. We can talk to native people from tribes that would have been related to the people who created the petroglyphs. In this case, we think it were Algonquian people that we call the Shanks Ferry culture, who lived in Lancaster, the area that's now Lancaster County, prior to the Susquehannock people from about maybe 1200 AD to 1500 AD. These would be thunderbirds, maybe on the left, it's an actual person who has the rank of an eagle. The feathers hanging down may represent his rank in society. We have possible directional indicators. You can see that the petroglyph sites themselves are lined up in groups of three. They might be pointing to a spot on the horizon that has significance. We have animal tracks that are in lines that also might denote direction. We have groups of animals that are walking in a certain direction. We have serpents that are pointing in certain directions. We have figures that might be telling stories. We have figures that might be hunting magic, as for example, this gentleman with a bow and arrow might be hunting the animal to the right. Some of these figures might relate to the people's religious beliefs. We can go to ethnology here and see that Very similar Ojibwe figure of a man with what looks like holding an animal, signifies a medicine person, holding an otter skin bag. In this case, the curved lines, the medicine, Ojibwe medicine person said, represent a place where medicine people go to receive visions. So a vision quest, we'll say. Um, there's oftentimes a way to get into the earth at Algonquian rock art sites, maybe a rock shelter or a crevice in the rock. At Safe Harbor, we do have voids under both Little Indian Rock and Big Indian Rock. They're only exposed when the water's drawn down. But you can see it's a place where you can actually enter into the essentially the womb of Mother Earth. We have figures such as this horned underwater serpent, Ginnebick, which the photo in the upper right might be a representative version of that um, um, spiritual symbol. Of course, we have the deep, so it would be a great place for the horned underwater serpent to live, whether coincidental or not. We have symbols that occur all over the continent. Some of these symbols occur worldwide. We also have this great sky dome. We're up here in Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods. There weren't a lot of places to view the sky. This was a perfect spot. We have representations of things like this grouping of cupules on Circle Rock that may represent the Pleiades. We have a symbol on Little Indian Rock that may represent a solar eclipse. And we have serpents that point to the places on the horizon where the sun rises and sets on the first day of the seasons. So here we have winter solstice sunrise, summer solstice sunset on Little Indian Rock, spring and fall equinox sunrise, and on Little Indian Rock, because of the hills, it doesn't work the way it would on a flat horizon. So the sun doesn't set in line with these serpents, but there's a serpent on another rock that does align with where the sun sets on the equinoxes. Now, it's kind of interesting to um, ponder how it happens that you can go to a place like Chichen Itza on the spring equinox and see a representation using the same symbols. You can see on the stairway the serpent shadow winding its way down that stairway as a result of the angle that's shining on the corner of that pyramid. Um, you know, it makes my hair stand on end thinking that these two places over 1,000 miles away, people were observing the same event using the same symbols. Um, I think I might have put that one in by accident, but uh, I'm using it to demonstrate that these places I believe were places where people came to pray, to receive guidance from Creator, and to just be in better contact with their Mother Earth. So to wrap things up, I call this a special landscape or sacred space where one can come closer to Creator. Oh, and so now here comes the plugs. If you This is a great book by Neil King that talks a little bit about a visit to the petroglyphs that he took with me a couple years ago, the late Neil King. And we also have a guide to the Safe Harbor Petroglyphs. Um, Petroglyph or gift certificates, great Christmas present, and rock art t-shirts. So with that, I'll turn it over if we have any questions or anything like that.
Amazing, Paul. Thank you so much. So the obvious question in the chat, is there any way to judge or estimate how old these are?
Yeah, so the we can get an idea at Safe Harbor because there are images of, for example, there's a person holding a bow and arrow. So the bow and arrow didn't come to this area until 1,000, 1,200, maybe 1,500 years ago maximum. So they would be younger than that. Um, we think they were carved by the Shanks Ferry people who occupied this area in a certain time period, 1,000 to 500 years ago. The ones at Bald Friar and Walnut Island are a little more difficult. Some of the ones at Walnut Island were buried under 10 feet of silt. They might be much older, and I think the general feeling these days are is that both the Bald Friar petroglyphs and the Walnut Island petroglyphs would have been uh, older than the Safe Harbor petroglyphs.
Do you think there are other sites like this? You mentioned that like the Safe Harbor site was thought to be destroyed and it's not. Is there a possibility that we will discover new sites?
Sure, sure. You have to look for them, to find them. You get into western Pennsylvania over the Allegheny Mountains, and there are numerous rock art sites out that way. Not all of them are on rivers. There are upland sites. Um, we have not found them in this area. But I'll say that I found a new petroglyph at Safe Harbor last month, and another rock art site just a few years ago. The Conowingo, the ones at the Octorara were only found a few years ago. And there's a possible site that I'm looking at in northern Maryland that may prove productive too.
Nice. So here's a question in the chat. Do the inscribers select a particular type of rock to inscribe, or are they all the same?
Mm. All of these are bedrock, and in the Safe Harbor area, it is a very hard mica schist, and the schist is infused with quartz. And I like to call Big Indian Rock the grandfather of the grandfathers. That is the biggest, hardest chunk of rock in that part of the Susquehanna River. It's lasted through all those thousands and thousands of years of erosion. So um, they tend to be on a hard, smooth surface, and but the I'm not sure exactly what the Bald Friar, what the composition of those rocks are, but that's also a hard rock.
A couple more things coming in the chat here. Is the Orcororo site exposed to be seen? How far from Route 22? I don't know if you can give
Yeah,
specific information about
so
where these are.
The Octorara Creek, um, that is, there's a small park right next to that. And if you go right underneath the bridge, um, the road bridge, I think it's 222. They are just a few yards up from the bridge. Again, you kind of have to know what you're looking for, but you can see them.
Right. I'm going to sort of pass over the question about future trips by NHSM because, as I mentioned earlier, we are looking for a canoe coordinator. So,
There you go, get that
Henry,
core.
thank you for that. Awesome. I'll get back to you on that. Any idea why there are very similar motifs on the petroglyphs you've shown us today to some others from different cultures, like the ones at Newspaper Rock in Utah?
Yeah, boy, that can open up a can of worms there. So, some of these are symbols are you can see worldwide. The serpent figures I always go to because a serpent is a significant figure among all religions, uh, all continents. It stands for cosmic knowledge. A lot of people, the uh, symbol for medicine with the staff with serpents, the serpent headdress in Egypt, all of that. So, there's this idea of a universal knowledge among humans, some sort of genetic thing. Also, people just got around a lot more than we give them credit for. We have Google Maps now, so take out your Google Maps and punch in Chichen Itza, and then push the pedestrian person and see how long it takes to walk there. About 6 months, you can do it. This idea that people started up in the Bering Strait, and over the course of thousands of years they migrated to South American and eastern part of the continent. um, People get around, they share ideas, and uh, as a result, we see things in the Southwest that look a lot like the things in the Northeast, particular things like the man with big hands and big feet, which may symbolize somebody who went on a migration, right? The big feet, they walk a lot. Big hands was a leader of a group.
Yeah, no, I'm actually reading right now a book by David Graeber about that addresses, among other things, this idea that people in Paleolithic times traveled constantly, much more than we do now, and they were always on the move. And so they would be in contact with folks who were, nearby and far away, and there was this constant exchange of ideas and iconography. And I think that's really something that's worth exploring. That's really cool.
Yeah,
I'd love to have you.
the Susquehanna people up here regularly traveled to trade with people in the Carolinas.
Yeah.
So just imagine taking a walk from your house down to South Carolina.
Here's another question. Are these sites protected by the government? Do any tribes claim the sites as theirs? And I think there might be
Mm,
a question about like rights issues.
yeah. So this gets to be a sticky issue too. These particular sites at Safe Harbor are um, property of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They're listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but that doesn't really give them any protection except with regard to federal projects. There are archaeological vandalism, laws against vandalizing archaeological sites in Pennsylvania, but the um, the current philosophy on protecting sites like this, and I'm on the board of the Eastern States Rock Art Research Association too. And the idea is that you educate people to the significance of the sites, and you actually bring people out onto the sites so that there is a regular presence, and they're just not out there in the middle of nowhere where nobody comes.
Awesome.
That's
Other
part of the
questions?
reason that I wrote this guide, because this um, tells you exactly where the petroglyphs are so that you don't stand on them. They tell you it gives you all the guidance as to how to conduct yourself when you're out there, um, and the proper ethics of visiting. Now, as far as being claimed by native uh, tribes or people, uh, I'm not aware of any native group that has says these belong to our culture. Um, it would be possibly like the Lenape or the Nanacoke, someone related to those people, maybe. There are issues at some rock art sites where the native people do not want the pictures to be taken. Um, it's a tricky area, but what we can do is to treat them with the proper respect. I think it's not only part of native culture; it's part of the story of the land where we live, and it doesn't matter where we're from. We're if we trace our roots, we all go back to people who live close to the earth. So, we're all native people, and we can all take something from those sites.
Yeah, wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. Paul Nevin, everyone. And for those who want to know more about this, please stop by our museum on Blair Road, 6908 Blair Road, December 1st, Sunday after Thanksgiving. Paul will be there to sign copies of his book and do a reading. Great way to learn more and meet him in person. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. I appreciate all of you for being here, and tune in next month for more Archaeology Club content. That was awesome. Thanks so much.
Uh,
Thank
my
you.
pleasure.